I was in my first year of high school when the attacks on 9/11 occurred. A student walked into my second period class late, and instead of being chewed out for being late, he just turned on the TV. The first tower was smoking, and we were all discussing whether or not this was an accident. After the second tower was hit, we knew that it wasn't. Many of the students found ways to excuse themselves from the class, citing various personal connections to what was going on. Some seemed legit, most didn't. Nobody was crying yet, but people did have tear-glossed eyes, and I could tell that it was very upsetting. I immediately recognized that my own personal emotional reaction was considered inappropriate for the time and place. I didn't think much of what was going on in New York. What I thought, after realizing it was intentional, is so what? Another nut job killed a bunch of people to get his point across, and his point is probably no good. I immediately thought of Timothy McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombings, as well as Ted Kaczynski, who had recently been apprehended for sending letter bombs. I also thought of the white nationalist and anti-technology ideologies that inspired them respectively. So when the news reported that the engineer behind these attacks was a radical Muslim named Osama bin Laden, the only surprise was that it wasn't domestic. But the connection between these different terrorist attacks didn't seem to be on anyone else's minds or mouths. I remember the reactions when those domestic terrorist events were recent. It was shock, definitely sympathy for the victims, but counterbalanced with the idea that it's the cost of living in a free society. But for some time after 9/11, an American would be considered sleeping with the enemy if they didn't make fun of every Hindu and Sikh they ran across. I couldn't account for the difference in emotional response. The reason many cited was the sheer radicalism of the ideologies involved, but this didn't hold up to any real scrutiny. Timothy McVeigh, a radical white nationalist, was essentially written off as just some redneck. Ted Kaczynski, a primitivist, was written off in the same regard. Why couldn't we write Osama bin Laden off in the same way? The truth became clear, that in the American experience, racism or primitivism is considered as American as apple pie, while radical Islam is a strange and invading force. This was xenophobia. My interest in the uneven emotional response to 9/11 was quickly superseded by my interest in the uneven security response. Tim McVeigh, when apprehended, was sentenced to death and given 2 pints of Ben & Jerry's ice cream before he went. Ted Kaczynski was locked up forever. Now, I base this on no absolute moral principle, but I think the end of any human being, no matter what crimes he has done, should at least be one of those 2 things. So imagine my surprise when instead of tracking Osama bin Laden and whoever else was responsible down and having them meet the same fate, we were instead involved in a more general military conflict in Afghanistan. Instead of a criminal pursuit, it was called a war on terrorism. To the immediate delight of those who were so shaken up by 9/11, the U.S. wasn't only out to catch those responsible, but also take out the root cause. This is very intelligent on first glance, but at some critical point, taking out the root cause becomes a slippery slope. If terrorism is wrong because it kills innocent civilians, then a war that piles on more casualties is antithetical to the very reason for that war. Now, it has taken me 6 years to fully form my opinion and emotional response to 9/11. This can be partially attributed to being 14 when the attacks occurred and my brain not being fully formed, but more to my apprehension to express feelings that I felt were inappropriate. I was ashamed. I even thought that I was some sort of sociopath or some sort of emotional cripple because my feelings did not line up with the populace at large. Now, although that common knee-jerk response to the events has faded, there is a more subtle campaign of propaganda going on. Phrases like never forget or always remember. I can agree with this in a historical sense, but never in an emotional one. Sometimes, most times, it is better to forget. It is only because radical Muslims have not forgotten about the U.S. tampering with their politics that 9/11 happened at all. All it causes is further pain and terror to insist on remembering. To insist that the attacks on 9/11 were more than a simple mass killing, that they were an attack on our pride, our freedom, our Americanism. That is terrorism. It's intentionally terrifying us. It's emotional manipulation. The first strike may have been committed by Osama bin Laden, but the continued campaign of emotional manipulation carried out by politicians and American civilians, that is the real terrorist act. If you want to fight terrorism, fight mind control. Don't let Rudy Giuliani or any other politician or a bumper sticker or any popular sentiment tell you how to feel about these events. If you really support freedom of speech and expression, then you must support freedom of thought. In this sense, you would be doing more to fight terrorism to forget about 9/11. It is fighting terrorism to bury it with all the other historical mass killings. Because the disproportionate attention paid to this single terrorist act is the terrorist act that is still happening every day. I am no longer ashamed to accurately judge the scale of 9/11 in my mind is not very important. So how about some new groupthink? Some new slogans to get us back to neutral. How about 9/11, whatever, or 9/11, so the fuck what?